All right, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Cameron Cousins, and I am a popcorn chicken addict. And you can see from the photo behind me that I'm not the only one at the FEM school where I'm a teacher and sustainability coordinator who is ecstatic when popcorn chicken appears on the lunch menu. But because I know that our popcorn chicken comes from the recesses of a refrigerated Cisco truck that stops by once a week and not from happy chickens like these raised in a sustainable fashion, my practicum story is actually about my efforts to remove popcorn chicken from the dining hall and replace it with more sustainably and locally sourced food. My practicum story is also about learning how to navigate through unanticipated situations and how to swing at a few curveballs thrown my way. So the dining hall at FEN is run by an outside third-party food service provider, and they prepare lunch for about 350 mouths each school day. Up to this point, the sustainability efforts of the food service provider have been rather token and temporary. The thing that irks me most is that nobody in the dining hall has really shown a lot of interest in local food procurement. To me, this doesn't make a lot of sense because local food procurement is a very viable option for FEN. There are two reasons to this. First, the agricultural heritage of Concord, Massachusetts, where the school is located, is very deep. It has been a farming community since colonial times, and even today there are about 24 commercial farms in town, 3 of which have licenses to raise and sell livestock. Secondly, FEN as a private institution has a few more resources and a little bit more flexibility in its decision making than a public school or even other private institutions in the area. So FEN actually has a responsibility to make those sustainable choices because those choices don't necessarily represent hardships for us. So when it came time to choose a practicum topic, it was a no-brainer that I wanted to take a look at what local food procurement would look like for my school. I wanted to reduce the number of food miles of the food that was entering our kitchen and tie it back into the broader issue of climate change. So in the fall, I began to take a look at barriers and motivators to farms and institutions as they look to strengthen a local, direct, farm-to-institution food system. My original intent for a practicum project was to create an action plan which I would then hand off to the food service provider that would help them work towards more local food procurement for certain items. Easy, right? As I got into the fall research, I started thinking more about the system that I was attempting to bring change to. FEN, like a lot of other institutions in the country, contracts out the work of managing the dining hall to an outside food service provider. Now, it's the responsibility of that service provider to manage and execute the day-to-day choices that are being made around food in our kitchen. So that means that the administrators and the decision makers of the institution aren't necessarily on the front lines of those food choices. However, it did dawn on me that at the end of the day, FEN, like many other institutions, is still the one signing the checks and setting the general parameters of the contract. For me, that meant that before I could approach the food service provider with an action plan for local food procurement, I would have to get FEN's administration, namely our head of school and our director of finance and operations, on my side. FEN, as the institution, would have to be the one to put the pressure on the food service provider. So the purpose of my research in the fall actually changed a couple weeks in, and I started collecting data and anecdotal evidence that would help me build a case for why FEN should put that pressure on the food service provider and ask for more local food procurement. So things were going great. In December, I scheduled a meeting with the head of school and our DFO, that director of finance and operations, to update them on how I was doing and to ask for their continued support and partnership because they've been very open to this idea from the beginning. It was at that meeting that I encountered my first unanticipated situation. They let me know that indeed FEN was beginning to go through a request for proposal process, which would happen in the spring as they looked for a brand new food service provider. Interesting. So this meant for my original plan of writing an action plan, that had to get thrown out the window, but it also presented a really great opportunity for me to potentially get in on the ground level with a brand new food service provider and do some really good and deep thinking about local food procurement. So over the winter, I turned my research attention to the language of requests for proposals and contracts as it exists around sustainable food procurement and other sustainable behaviors in general in the food service industry. I was finding a lot of really useful and detailed information from establishments that had larger contracts, namely universities and large hospitals. Finding really good stuff. I had another meeting, a check-in meeting, scheduled with the DFO for February, and that was when curveball number 2 came my way. He told me that they had decided not to do an RFP process, after all, because he had identified 2 leading food service providers already and was beginning to do negotiations over the phone and in person with them. So there goes my research. It made a lot of sense, actually, for an institution of Fenn's size. It was much more efficient to do it this way, and I absolutely understood that. But it made me nervous because A, I wasn't sure what that meant for my abilities to fulfill my educational obligations to Antioch with this project. But it also made me nervous because I had seemed to have lost this crucial intervention point for putting pressure on Fenn to request local food procurement from the food service provider. I didn't know how I was going to do it at this point. So seemingly this project was unraveling right before my very eyes, and I had no idea of what direction I was heading in. Fortunately, at this point in time, something jogged in my memory, and I recalled this book, Leadership for Sustainability. Now, you guys will recall that this book is a collection of 30 case studies and reflections written by sustainability practitioners as they try to bring change to a system, either a workplace system or a home community system. Now, the topics of all of these case studies are varied, but the one thing they have in common is their use of the action research model. Now, action research is a way of thinking that allows an individual to learn about bringing change to a dynamic system through experimentation and experience. Action research requires that an individual take action, observe the response of the system to that action, reflect on what that means, and then act again based on the learning that happened in the first part of the cycle. Because action research is cyclical, repeated, and iterative, it actually embraces the notion that learning and thought can evolve over time. So it allows for individual evolution simultaneous with system-wide evolution. So for us today, I would just like you to think of action research as informed, courageous tinkering. And those of you guys who remember that I like to putter, this is good. So it's informed, courageous tinkering. And this is a model that resonated with me at this very point in the project because it provided a philosophy for approaching some very messy terrain. It gave me pathways and guidelines as I tried to navigate through a situation that I had never been in before and a situation that nobody in my institution had ever been in before. Most importantly, action research reminded me that it's better to take action than sit there and wallow in the fear of the chaos that was unfolding. So I took action. I gathered all of my fall academic research, my spring investigations into RFP and contract language, as well as my spring interviews with other stakeholders at Fenn and others at peer schools, and I created a talking points matrix. I gave this matrix to the DFO so that he could refer back to it in his negotiations with the food service providers going forward this spring. I outlined 3 very attainable goals for Fenn, provided suggestions on contract language, provided examples from other contracts that I had found useful and compelling, and also included information on what those different scenarios would mean for Fenn and mean for the community around us. DFO loved it. He brought this document with him to every meeting. I saw him striding around campus with it. It was great. It was the right information in the right format at the right time. However, sad trombone, there is a disconnect between the success and the content of this document and what I really found through my 2 semesters of research. The farm to institution food systems that are most successful and most robust are those that have a single individual driving that motion forward. Now, these individuals also happen to have a considerable amount of decision-making power. So they tended to be the farm owner or the manager of the kitchen who was responsible for his or her own budget and operations. Okay, so these are individuals whose personal values aligned very closely with the value-added social, financial, and ecological benefits of a robust farm-to-institution food system. These were the individuals who were making concessions about pricing structures, changing the delivery and drop-off habits in their kitchen, and tinkering, there we go again, with their communication styles with the other constituents along the food path. This was an individual that the Fenn School did not have, that passionate person with the decision-making power. So I was a little afraid because I did not know how far we would get in our efforts to do more local food procurement if we only came at it from a contract point of view. Unanticipated situation number 3. Just 1 month ago, not even a month ago at this point, the current manager of our dining hall announced that he was leaving to run his own restaurant, rather. So jointly, Fenn and the food service provider scrambled, and they quickly identified a new individual to run the dining hall for the next couple of months while our current contract expired. They identified a very dynamic and energetic young woman, and she's got a lot of great qualifications, but I am absolutely over the moon because in her interview, she said that one of her main professional goals was more local food in institutional establishments. Problem solved, world saved, right, for now. So, I mean, it all sounds very serendipitous that this one passionate individual should show up at our doorstep at the same time that I've just identified the need for somebody like that. But I actually think it's a little more intentional. In the food service industry, local food procurement has gone from being wishful thinking on the part of a few people to this trendy buzzword that people are throwing around and trying to get familiar with, to a concept that the majority of stakeholders in the food service industry actually get, they understand it. So the result is when you have all of these stakeholders together at a table, in this case it was Fenn, the food service provider, and this potential employee, people are able to have meaningful conversations about what local food procurement could look like. This is not something that would have been the case 5 years ago at our school. And this is not to say that local food procurement has arrived in the food service industry. It hasn't yet. There's still a lot of work to do. But we are starting to see a start, and I'm happy to say that I think it has arrived at Fenn, and I hope for good. Now, it's not guaranteed that this woman is going to be a long-term fix because who knows what's going to happen in a couple months when our current contract expires, but she's an exciting enough addition to the kitchen service staff that it has gotten the Director of Finance and Operations and I to talk about what that individual, what her presence, what her influence would be on any future contract. So it turns out that we need to find the right balance between having stringent metrics and a good, thoughtful, targeted goals. We need to balance that with a little flexibility and the opportunity for the kitchen staff to use their creative problem-solving powers as they address these sustainability issues. Okay? So we are too small of an institution, really, to justify the 50 to 60 page contracts that a lot of universities have with list after list of metrics, but we're too large of an institution to sort of just hand it off to the kitchen service staff and say, here, see what you can do with this, okay? So I think that action research can actually provide some clarity as to what we need to do with this contract. I think looking at action research as a model will allow us to build in the flexibility and encourage that experimentation and encourage that divergent thinking, but also pair that with the good business sense of measurement and documentation. So the challenge this summer is actually going to be to embed this soft discipline of action research into a legal document like a contract. It's going to be a fascinating summer. You thought we were going on vacation. So I wish I had a slam dunk of a conclusion that I could just wrap up in a pretty bow and hand off to you, but I don't, because I haven't actually finished my project. And that's the nature of action research, and that's the nature of sustainability. It never ends. If it's not popcorn chicken, it's going to be some other problem that the thinking around popcorn chicken raised as needing attention and change. I will most likely be working on some iteration of the popcorn chicken project for as long as I am at FEM. And that's how it should be, and that's what I have to do as a sustainability practitioner, and I'm excited for that. So throughout the day today, we are going to hear a lot about the sustainability challenges that face this world. My charge to you is this. If there is something that piques your interest or strikes you as the least bit unjust, take action. Do something tonight. Do it again tomorrow. Throw some informed, courageous tinkering at it. The immediacy of today's sustainability problems require nothing less of all of us. Thank you.